Here I am, back again to finish up a little bit more of my 2003. My name is Phil, and you're listening to The Live. Okay, everybody, last week's episode was about me getting to the hospital after getting sick. It's a crazy situation. Slight recap, but only a slight recap before we get into the other stuff. Don't want to bore you too much before we get into more of the current stuff that we're about to go into. What I've got for you right now is last week's episode, real fast recap. I told you that I had gone into the hospital on April 30th, and I went into a few of the details going into my stay there. I ended up having an entire team of doctors that I had to work with, an oncologist, a gastrointestinal specialist, and a pulmonary specialist, not to mention the gentleman who would become my regular doctor. Ultimately, I had somebody who was checking out my gut, somebody checking out my lungs, and somebody making sure if I had cancer, he would be able to treat me. Fortunately, the first doctor that I was able to eliminate was, in fact, the oncologist. There was no cancer. They continued to test other things. It seems like the gastrointestinal doctor did, in fact, confirm that I had pancreatitis, which I had to give you a sidebar in that episode to let you know that I didn't ever drink, didn't smoke, no drugs that weren't prescribed to me, and it really baffled the gastro doctor because he just would have assumed that I was a heavy drinker. And that was the number one reason that I could potentially have gotten pancreatitis. Of course, on that sidebar, I went into detail on the fact that I was taking a lot of leave because my ankles were swelling and they were hurting. I thought it was from track, but it was actually a side effect of my yet to be diagnosed condition, which I'm going to get to later in this episode. Turns out that taking a bottle and a little more of a leave in a week, every week for about 2 months, is a really, really bad idea. And I just about killed myself by doing that, completely unaware of the side effects of what was going to happen. And that's pretty much where I left it off. Let everybody know that, yeah, I had pancreatitis, but they were still trying to do tests in order to find out what else is wrong with me. Why was I still coughing? Why did I lose so much weight? Which is one of the major side effects of what was going on with me. I lost a ton of weight really quickly. And that's really a quick recap of where I was last week. Now, to let you know, this episode is being recorded quite early again. The episode isn't going to hit the airwaves of YouTube here until May 24th, 2025. Right now, it's actually May 4th, 2025. So, about a month before this episode, 20 days before this episode is actually going to air. But of course, by that point in time, I will have become Hitman years old because my birthday, as I record on May 4th, is tomorrow, May 5th. And once again, I will be Hitman years old tomorrow. Or by the time this episode is actually published, I will definitely be Hitman years old as long as I make it through the night. Um, that'll be a fun year, I hope. Hitman is definitely one of my favorite games, and if you're not sure how old Hitman Years Old is, you just have to give it a Google, and I think it would be a fun thing, and then you know exactly how old I am. But on another note, I will certainly say that this episode, to give you a little bit of clarity in how it's going to run, because I started last week on April 30th of 2003, and I was sort of skipping around here and there as stuff was coming to my mind because I'm not going to lie to you. When I was sitting in the hospital, I didn't have a notepad and a pen with me and was taking notes, jotting down exactly what happened and when it happened, what date and time. So the stuff that I'm telling you all happened between April 30th, 2003, and my release date at the hospital, which, as long as things go well as I'm recording now, I will actually reveal that date as well in this episode. If not, well, I'll push it to the next one, but we'll get there. That's where I'm heading. We will get there. But as far as right now, it's definitely going to be time for me to fill in the blank. Now, the question for the fill in the blank portion of our show is, what was the most interesting part of being in the hospital? Well, I can certainly say the most interesting part for me of being in the hospital was the fact that I was in the hospital on my birthday back in 2003. And it seems to be rather interesting that I'm deciding to make this episode about more of that hospital stay, considering that my birthday, as I'm recording, is going to be tomorrow, May 5th, 2025. And more interestingly enough, during my hospital stay in 2003, I turned 25. So here I am, about to turn Hitman years old on May 5th, 2025. And the story that I'm telling you is about me being in the hospital on my 25th birthday. And truly, I guess that would be the most interesting part of the whole experience. The fact that all this happens on and around my 25th birthday. Most people have a very, very different experience on their 25th birthday, and I am certainly not going to be upset about a thing that those people got to enjoy on their 25th birthday. It's just mine. Well, probably not the way I envisioned my 25th year of life starting. So, once again, the question for the fill in the blanks is, what was the most interesting part about being in the hospital? And, well, that was it. The fact that I was in the hospital on and around and through my 25th birthday. Now it's time for me to ring the bell and begin the main event, where I'm going to pick up where I left off from last week as I'm in the hospital. All right. I gave you a slight recap of where I was, and just to further cement what was going on, like I said, I was getting a lot of tests, a lot of different sets of blood work, and it was determined that I absolutely had pancreatitis. And up until many years after my experience in the hospital, I didn't know, and they didn't know how I got the pancreatitis. Turns out it was from taking excessive amounts of leave. Only figured that out around 2013, so ish. So quite literally 10 years after the experience is when I actually really came to terms and understood the fact that that's where and how I got the pancreatitis. Is what it is. Is what it is. But let's go into some more of the stories that were going on as far as me being in the hospital. I can tell you that one of the experiences while sitting in that hospital bed that was lightning to my spirit, to make a long story short, is that the hospital, which will remain unnamed because of my opinion of that hospital from time to time, as I sat in the bed, I was flipping through the channels, and they had the coolest channel for some bizarre reason. This hospital had a camera that was facing into the waiting room, and I don't know why. And it was only facing two chairs. But yeah, there was a camera that was pointed at two chairs in the waiting room of the hospital. And while you're sitting at your bed, you could turn your TV and you would get a live feed from the hospital camera, and you would be able to see people sitting in these chairs. I'm not really sure if it's something that was entirely legal, but the thing that's so amusing about the fact that they had the camera facing those chairs and that they pumped it in through a feed so that the people who were patients in the hospital could live watch what was going on with the people who were sitting in those chairs is just hilarious because this is, like I said, 2003. We're not talking about people walking around with their cell phones and live streaming video and posting it right to YouTube or Facebook or whatever your flavor of the month social media is. We didn't do that back then. We couldn't. You could take videos, and it just wasn't the same as being able to do the Facebook Live, Instagram Live. We couldn't do that. But this chair, these two chairs, I'll never forget it as long as I live. There were two chairs that were in the waiting room of this hospital, and people would sit in those chairs, and they would be completely oblivious and totally unaware that they were on camera and that the people who were sitting in their hospital rooms could watch them. It was just two random chairs that they picked to face this camera. And there would be plenty of times when, uh, during that whole period when I was in the hospital, that there might not necessarily be anything particularly good on TV. And so what I would do is I would flip that channel and see who was sitting in the chair. Sometimes there'd be somebody there, sometimes there wouldn't be. If there wasn't anybody in there, I would move on. And if there was somebody there, I would just sit there and patiently wait for that person to do something. And what do I mean by do something? Anything. They're just sitting in a chair, minding their own business, having no clue that they're being recorded and being viewed by the people who are in the rooms. And it was just absolutely hilarious that they did that. I wish I could have been in the room when the hospital administration decided to put the camera in that. spot, and I wonder why they chose that particular spot. It's not necessarily any different than any of the chairs that were in the waiting room, but those chairs were the ones they picked. And my goodness, sometimes you'd see people in there and you would watch them as they would have a bag because they were waiting to go to visit somebody who was on some floor, any floor, didn't really know which one they were. And there would be not, I guess, the situation where there would be too many people in the room and they would have to wait and they would just sit in those chairs and have a book and flip through the book and you could see people reading. Sometimes you could see them eating snacks. Other times there might be two people in the chair. There was no audio, but you could see if there were two people who were sitting in those chairs, they may have known each other. Sometimes you could see them talking back and forth. Just, I mean, I don't understand it. I'll never figure it out. In fact, it was the strangest thing. It was so strange to the point where, as I was thinking about this, to do this on this episode, I didn't even write the notes down. It just sort of popped in my head. But I'll never forget it because my cousin Matt came to visit me with his mother, and I think there was too many people. I think I could only have three people visit me at a time, or two people. I think it might have been two. And it was my aunt Susan who was passed on most recently, this in December 2024, and my mother, who were in the room at the time. So my cousin was just waiting downstairs, and he was going to flip flop. I think my mom, or I want to say it was his mom, I can't remember which one it was, who switched up and let him come up, and we talked for a few minutes. But the funniest thing is, unaware, he walked downstairs inside the hospital waiting room. He sat down in one of those chairs. He just did. Had no idea, didn't have the foresight to know that he was going to be on there, and he was just sitting there, just waiting to come up. And I was showing my aunt Susan that, yeah, look at this. There's Matt. He's actually sitting in that chair, and it was weird that he sat in that chair because he didn't know that that was the chair that was being pumped into the room. It just made it so funny when he came up that we started talking about how we were watching him. He was sitting in that chair, completely unaware that he was just being watched by not just me, because anybody else who was in the hospital, I imagine, who was had their room, could have tapped into that channel and would have seen him just sitting there, plain as day. Crazy, crazy to think about. Let's see something else that happened during that time. There was two people who had in my room at different times. There was um, I want to go to that first. Where will we go? Yeah. If I talk about the two people, yeah, I'll talk about the two people. I'll go there. When I first got to the room on August 30th, 2003, I was alone until May 2nd. It was just me in the room by myself. There was two beds. It was my bed and an empty bed. I got the window seat, which I was actually very glad of. I'd rather be in the corner in the window seat. Even though it was a little bit farther away from the bathroom, I still preferred the window seat because it didn't really matter. Because if you remember when I was talking about the fact that they were pumping me full of stool softeners prior to giving me an enema on my actual birthday, I hadn't used the bathroom in like 4 days. So it didn't make any difference how far away I was. It's a weird way to put it, especially when I'm talking about my roommates. But now, May 2nd, that first roommate shows up. It's an older guy. Now, when I'm saying older guy, I'm 24, just about to turn 25 in a couple days at this point. I estimate that the gentleman who came into the room first was in his mid upper 40s, no older than low 50s. I don't know exactly how old, but I know he was significantly older than I was then, but not much older than I am right now. So he's probably my age then. He's probably my age currently, roughly speaking, back then. Now, I guess they put him in my room because of my side effect or symptom of vomiting because of my pancreatitis. So they wanted to put all of us pukies in the same room at the same place. That's all I could think of. So when one of us started, as they would say, blowing chunks or spewing, the other wouldn't be so, I guess, nauseated because it probably wasn't going to be too long before the other one was going to do the same. I think that might have been their thinking. I don't know. But that's why they put us in the same room together, I guess. And this gentleman and I pretty much spoke every once in a while, but not very often. He wasn't in the room for very long either. He probably was only in there, like I said, he came to my room in May 2nd, and I do believe he was gone before my birthday, so he probably was out of there by May 4th. Because, in fact, that sounds very much accurate. I think he was only in there for the 2 days, the second, the third, and then he was gone uh, in the morning of May 4th before my birthday. Because during my birthday, I was alone. There was nobody in my room. So he was probably only, yeah, that makes sense. He was there the second. I remember that for sure because I was watching TV in the morning and he came in and he was gone after I did a test on May 4th. And that was a CT scan and an X-ray. They just kept radiating me most of that time until they found my diagnosis. And he had a much worse time as far as the vomiting than I did. My guy was pretty safely throwing up every 2 hours or so, like clockwork. Like for me, they were pumping me full of fluids and they had contained my pancreatitis to the point where I didn't have any more of the pain and I wasn't throwing up. Quite literally, from getting into the hospital, the last time I threw up was when I was at the Old Country Buffet and it hadn't happened again the rest of my ordeal throughout 2003. But this dude, every, like I said, every 2 hours or so, I would hear him throwing up. Just not the most pleasant situation that you could possibly have been in. But like I said, he was only there for a couple days and then he was gone. And admittedly, because of listening to the sound of him throwing up, I'm glad that he was gone. Laughing about it, but I, of course, was in the same room and the doctors would come in and it seemed as if he went out for testing quite as frequently as I did. And since we were in the same room, I would hear what the doctors were saying to him, and there was never any real resolution to his situation. All I knew was that on the fourth, they said, "Well, your roommate is gone. He went home." And I was like, "Oh, okay." When I came back from my test, he wasn't there. But the whole time, I didn't hear a doctor say, Eureka, we know exactly what's wrong with you. We're going to give you this, that, and the other, and it's going to clear it up. I also never heard him say, well, we have no idea what it is, and you have 5 minutes to live. I didn't hear any of that. They were just as confused as my doctors were, and it just seemed like they didn't get what the answers they were looking for, and they just assumed, well, he's fine. Meanwhile, he was not fine. It's not funny, but it's funny. My man was not. He was not fine at all. Up until before he left, he was still throwing up. So they didn't figure it out, and he just left. I don't know what happened to him. All this 22 years later, I hope he figured it out sometime within that week or maybe that month. But he definitely didn't while sitting in the hospital next to me, and that's a shame, an absolute shame. Really, it was. Boy, it was. Ugh. But now we can talk about getting ready to introduce my second roommate. But prior to that, like I said, um, the first roommate was gone by the fourth, and there was nobody in my room during my birthday to experience the pleasure that I had with my enema, which was, it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. Um, and I'm coming from the perspective of somebody who has had two colonoscopies at this point in my life, and the diuretic that they gave me, it had nothing on the enema. That was instant and constant. It was just, whew, that was a rough experience. I can tell you right now, I man, I don't even want to think about going to the bathroom on my birthday after that. But what made me so, I guess, um, cognizant, cognizant of that situation was there was a really nice lady who came in who was cleaning the room all the time, and of course, I don't envy her job whatsoever because my room that I was in, like I said, I had the enema. The dude who was next to me was throwing up constantly. Who knows if I was going to do the same thing again because of my pancreatitis. And she was tasked with cleaning the bathroom and the whole rest of the room. And in the process, we were talking about, um, I can't remember. It was something in the process, small talk, weather, things of that nature, something like that. And she happened to look up at my chart where it has your birthday. And of course, my birthday was May 5th, and it was going to be the next day, May 4th, because she was cleaning up to prepare for whenever another patient was going to come into my room next to me. And she looked over at my chart and said, oh, your birthday is May 5th. And I'm like, yeah, it is. She goes, so is mine. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's really cool. But as I'm talking about other people who have birthdays on May 5th, I have to give shout outs to my two favorite birthday buddies. And of course, I'm amongst these birthday buddies that I'm going to talk about. I'm the older of these people. I think it would be really cool if some scenario, totally sidebar here, talking about my birthday, if I could sit down and have pizza with one of my birthday buddies while the other birthday buddy sung happy birthday to all of us. Because my birthday buddies that always just pop out at me are Henry Cavill, the guy who plays Superman, and Adele. She could sing happy birthday to us all, right? That'd be great. I digress. the nice lady who cleaned my room also shared my birthday, and she was telling me. It's like, I asked her, okay, because at that point I didn't know how long I was going to be in the hospital, whether I was going to be in there on my birthday or not. But it seemed as if I probably was, considering that I had the schedule, like I had spoken to before, that I was getting the lung biopsy or had the lung biopsy, and they were still trying to test um, what they had collected. So there was a pretty good chance that I wasn't going to be out of my birthday. I do recall asking her what her plans were, and I don't remember what she said, but it sounded. I remember that when she was talking about it, she was kind of hesitant to say how much fun that she was going to have on our birthday because, like I said, she took the day off and she wasn't going to be there. She was going to do whatever she was going to do. And here I was going to be in the hospital. So, as she was describing what she was going to be doing for her birthday, she started off with a excitement. And then, as she started to think about the fact that I'm probably still going to be in the hospital on our birthday, she kind of toned it down a little bit, sort of being a little bit respectful of me, knowing that I'm probably going to be in the hospital, which was pretty cool. That she actually, that she was aware enough of that to sort of, I guess, try to make sure that I wasn't all depressed because of being stuck in the hospital. I appreciated that. A little bit of Kool Aid this time. It's springtime, getting ready to go to summer, and I got some nice watermelon uh, Kool Aid inside of my Fetty. I love that thing. What is my Fetty? Again, I digress. Fetty is a fake Yeti. It's like a Yeti. It keeps things cold. It keeps things hot like a Yeti, but it's not a Yeti. So I call it a Fetty. Fake Yeti. Again, I sort of fallen off the reservation a little bit as I'm going to roll this thing back in and talk about my next roommate who came in on May 6th, the day after my birthday. This was an older gentleman, older than the last roommate. Like I said, he was around my age now, somewhere between middle to late 40s and low 50s, but the new guy was in his 60s. How do I know that? The obvious. He told me that he was 60 something. I cannot remember how old he was, but I do remember him telling me that he was in his 60s and that he was retired. Now, he, for some reason, gave me a lot of information that was going on with him. He told me why he was in the hospital and the fact that his hospital visit was more precautionary than anything else. So he thought that he was only going to be in there a few days, and he was. He was in there the 6th and the 7th of May, and that was it. He was gone. Uh, he came in, like I said, he came in early on the 6th, and he was gone in the mid afternoon of the 7th. He didn't stay long because, like I said, it was precautionary for him. He had an incident where he had a colostomy bag and he dropped it, and I guess it created an infection, and so he was in the hospital just to sort of monitor, just to make sure that it wasn't too bad, and it wasn't. He didn't have an infection. He was clean and he was good, but they had to make sure, and that's really the reason why he was in the hospital. And during his stay in the hospital, we started talking about, of all things, my favorite subject, and we talked a lot about it. and that is pizza. Yeah, me and this guy were talking about pizza. Now, mind you, I had only started eating, which I forgot to mention because I was being flooded with fluids because of the hydration from the vomiting that I was having. After I had my enema on my birthday, I was then able to eat. And we started talking about pizza. I told him about my entire vacation from the year before, where I had gone and eaten at multiple pizza places, 49, and had 117 slices of pizza over the 8 days. And he was like, "Yeah, that's a pretty cool thing. I mean, probably not going to be able to do it when you're when I'm probably not going to do it when you're my age," he said. And it's a good thing you got out of the way while you're young. And like I told you, he was in his 60s. He was telling me that he just loves going to different pizza places. And one of the things that he does is when he goes to a pizza place, him and his wife, he was telling me if they want to get a slice or two, what they'll do is they'll look over at the pies, slice pies that are there, and if they look okay, they'll grab one, no big deal. But if they're looking a little like they've been sitting there for a long, long time, his strategy is he'll just usually order a small pizza and they'll eat that, take home the rest. Of course, for me, I was telling him, yeah, I wish there was ever leftovers whenever I eat pizza. It's a very, very, very rare thing. And we had a nice little laugh about it. He was a good guy. Of course, to me, anybody who will sit there and talk pizza with me is definitely a good guy. And like I said, we had a lot of conversation, and that conversation was really just about pizza. You can't get any more to the point than that for me. And it was a good conversation, and we sort of he sort of maintained my entertainment. And speaking of entertainment, I couldn't have wanted to be in the hospital, but if I was gonna be in the hospital, the time that I was in the hospital could have been better with a question mark and an explanation. Turns out that during that time period, I was into the New Jersey Nets when they were playing basketball with Jason Kidd and Kenyon Martin and Richard Jefferson and Terry Kittles, Keith Van Horn, that group that went to the NBA Finals. There was plenty of games that were on during the time that I was in the hospital. Now, granted, over time, at the end of that, I started to have a different opinion of Jason Kidd, the fearless leader of the Nets at the time, and I'd rather not talk about him, especially since he failed to win the NBA championship with what was impossible to say that they didn't have a great team. They did. The men that I mentioned, I mean, that was a team. I mean, you take a lot of different years minus Michael Jordan playing, and that team could probably have gotten themselves a ring or two. They were really a good team, but it just wasn't to be. Now, the other team in New Jersey that was in the playoffs was a lot more fun for me to watch because that's the team that is in my second favorite sport of hockey, the NHL's own New Jersey Devils. Now, those boys, whoo boy, it was 2003 while getting to watch them in the playoffs again, and man, I loved it because they had already won the cup in 2000, and then they won the cup prior to that in the 94-95 season, the same year the 49ers won it their last time. Yeah. hmm I enjoyed the Devils and the 49ers winning the championship in the same. Yeah, that was fun. But let me tell you, Harold, Patrick Elias, Brian Giunta, Scott Gomez, John Madden, Colin White, the great Ken Danico, Scott Niedermeyer, Scott Stevens, a lot of Scots in the Devils, right? And of course, the greatest goalie of all time, the goalie who played the most games in net of any goalie ever, the goalie who got the most wins of any goalie ever, the goalie who got the most shutouts of any goalie ever. Did I actually mention that he, by default, has to be the greatest goalie of all time? And he was the netminder for the New Jersey Devils, the legendary Martin Brodeur. Just like the 49ers spoiled me with quarterbacks like Steve Young and Joe Montana, not throwing a single interception in the Super Bowl when they went to win and experience their Hall of Fame careers. Marty Brodeur, just three Stanley Cups, and he was the difference. The difference. Having that man in the net for those three Stanley Cup finals, and that one that came up in 2003, they had defeated the Mighty Ducks in what was one of the best series of all time, I think. Man. Thing went 7 games, overtime game in there. Some Ducks did everything they could to win that game, but Martin Brodeur said no. He simply said no. And the thing that's really amazing about how incredible that series was, the Devils took the Stanley Cup, but the goalie from the Ducks won the Conn Smythe Trophy, which is the award given to the most valuable player in the playoffs. The losing goalie got the MVP of the playoffs. Now think about how ridiculously incredible that has to be, because that man literally gave up the goal that cost his team the Stanley Cup. But because of his heroics throughout the playoffs, he did better than anybody else. He got the MVP of the playoff trophy. That's crazy good play. Got to take your hat off to him. Just simply do. But that was my entertainment by far. Watching the Devils play a few games, watching the Nets play a few games, and then of course, after I got out of the hospital, seeing them hoist the cup. There's just nothing better than that. Nothing better. Okay, where are we at here? Uh, lung biopsy. Uh, roommate. I think I can pull this off and finish my hospital journey here because the next thing I'm going to talk about is what happened on May 6th. May 6th. We'll go there. May 6th, in the middle of the afternoon, after having studied the lung biopsy and consulted with the doctor who was going to be my primary doctor from that point until 2007, Dr. Kaiser came to Dr. Booth, who was Dr. Kaiser, he's a pulmonologist who was doing the studies, of the lung biopsy, and Dr. Booth was the one who's going to be my general practitioner from this point on. They talked and they conferred, and both gentlemen came into my room on May 6th, and they had information for me. They had what was, I guess, you could say it was life-changing information, life-altering information, maybe. I don't know. But they had a story to tell me. And that story was that they had figured out what was wrong. And to give you an idea, the symptoms that I was having were fatigue, weakness, massive weight loss, a constant cough. Those were the reasons that put me in the hospital. And they told me that those symptoms could have come from any number of diseases. But it just so happens that the lung biopsy narrowed it down to the cause. What was making me sick from February till the present of May 2023? What was it? They explained. I had an autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis. Now, for one, most people think autoimmune, and some of the stuff that comes to mind is like lupus. Sarcoidosis is in that general class of autoimmune, but there is some weird stuff about sarcoidosis. To give you an idea, sarcoidosis is just a weird disease. For one, the craziest part about it is there's no exact cause known. There's no exact cause known. They don't know how you get it. And they phrase it so elegantly by saying there is no cause known. But in layman's terms, once more, they don't know how you get it. They have no idea. Is it an environmental factor? Is it a genetic factor? Did somebody like stick a needle in your arm? Was there like some sort of bad um, air in the room that you were at? Did you drink something? Did you eat something? They don't know how you get it. They still don't know how you get it. And most interestingly enough, there are several levels of it that range from pretty much debilitating, crippling, and life ending. And there's some mild forms that you don't even get a single symptom. Now, the fact that it's 23 years later and I was able to pass a physical for the Department of Corrections for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania should tell you that I definitely didn't have the long chronic version. But I also didn't have the version that didn't have any symptoms either, because the cough, the weight loss, the fatigue, the ankles, which were actually swelling, and after really paying attention, the doctors looked and there were rashes on my ankles. And that's what was causing the ankle pain, the rashes, and the swelling as a result of a side effect of the sarcoidosis. Um, Craziest part about it is this nasty disease isn't just like any other disease. It's weird. It's so weird. And one of the things that makes it so unique at the same time is you can have this disease affect your brain, your eyes, your kidneys, your heart, your lungs, your skin, and in your limbic system. The craziest part about this stuff is you, if you were to get it in any of these particular areas, you probably aren't going to have it in the other, but it's no guarantee that you wouldn't. One of the things that my doctor impressed upon me, both doctors Kaiser and Booth, um, even throughout the treatment, the one thing that I should definitely be cognizant of is to make sure to continuously get my eyes checked because sarcoidosis can affect your eyes, even if it's not where it generally came from. Mine was in the lung. Thus, they found it with the lung biopsy. Now, the treatment for that was steroids. And typically, what happens when an individual takes steroids and works out, they get big and strong. If you take steroids and you don't work out, it will still generally add weight to you. You'll still probably gain some weight. It was almost like whatever weight sapping part of the sarcoidosis that I had for the whole time that I was sick, I couldn't put on weight if I tried. It's crazy. It was probably a year later before I started putting on any more weight because even after taking the prednisone, which was the steroid of choice for me, stuff was so bad that I ended up having to take Pepsid and Ozcal because of the prednisone ability to attack bones, weaken them, and the possibility of giving you massive heartburn, especially when you're taking it every single day, like I was. But they gave me all that information, and Dr. Kaiser said he wanted to set up regular appointments so that he could monitor what was going on. Or, as I said, based on everything that that man did after he lied to me, that I wouldn't know what happened in my lung biopsy. He lied to me. I'm holding that against him. That he wanted to continuously monitor me to make sure that I was okay. Or, in my opinion, he just was trying to write a book about how he cured and discovered the reason for how sarcoidosis comes. That's just my personal opinion. And I'm entitled to it, and so I'm spewing it out. At this point, May 6th comes, they tell me what's going on. I'm doing lung function tests. Things still aren't quite the way they want them to be. And I'm still not feeling great. And Dr. Booth, who is my doctor, says now that we know what the issue is, we no longer need to hold you in the hospital because you've been able to eat and maintain the food. You're no longer dehydrated. We're pumping in all the fluids. And we need to monitor you. That's where they left it. Are you going to be able to go back to work tomorrow if we let you go? They said, nope. We're going to keep you out of work for the rest of the month. And so they set up my release papers for May 8th. And so I was able to leave the hospital on May 8th. And they said that both Dr. White, not Dr. White, White is no longer in the picture. It's Dr. Booth and Dr. Kaiser. Oh, no, Dr. White was in the picture because it was all three of them. The only one who was out of the picture was Dr. Green at this point. He had no more need to deal with me because I did not have cancer. But Dr. White wanted to do another checkup to make sure that the pancreatitis was in fact gone. Um, Dr. Booth wanted to see me once a week until the end of May, and I had scheduled two appointments to see Dr. Kaiser to make sure that the sarcoidosis had not advanced and gotten worse, or that it was simply only in my lungs, and he wanted to make sure that it was not anywhere else in the heart, because those are his areas of expertise. Um, I think it's just crazy that they figured it out, and it took 8 days for them to do all those tests. Now, to give you a little more perspective on how weird and nasty sarcoidosis can be, have you ever watched the series that came on Fox with Hugh Laurie as a doctor? And that show was called House. Now, recently, I guess it was last year, in this time that I've been just getting a chance to just binge watch series, I remembered from that series how frequently that amongst the testing that they were doing for those patients that Dr. House saw, because he only saw people who had very real, weird diseases, and he was able to identify them and treat them. And very frequently, the guess of what could have been wrong with the patient was sarcoidosis. Now, you have a doctor whose primary function is to diagnose, and because he was a diagnostician, to diagnose strange diseases, and yet several times during the series, sarcoidosis was brought up as a potential uh, cause for the sickness. And to my surprise, it was actually the cause on one of the episodes. Sarcoidosis was definitely one of the causes for one of the episodes. Of course, I wrote all this stuff down in my notes somewhere. Excuse me. But I can't remember where it is, or I would have actually gone and told you because I wrote it all down. It was something like 12 or 13 times that they had guessed that it was sarcoidosis throughout the entire series, and it was actually sarcoidosis once. That's how mysterious this disease is. And, well, I can honestly tell you that I pretty much finished with the hospital now. At this point in time, I think it's safe to say that I can move on and talk about the rest of the month of May and beyond. I do believe that that was the real thing. Because at this point in time, I gotta tell you how I was dealing with this sarcoidosis in the month of May and through the rest of 2003. Because this is the main body of the story that I needed to get to, because it didn't make any sense for me to tell you that I had pancreatitis and sarcoidosis without telling you the stuff that happened in 2002, because the decisions that I've made in 2002 affected what was happening in May of 2003. Now, I have more things that I want to talk about that continue in 2003, but I want to reiterate the fact that the decisions that were made definitely affected what happened here in May of 2003. What decisions specifically? I want to tell you that before I ring the bell of this episode, because I need that part to be closed so that I can definitely move forward. The major decision that I made and the things that were, I guess, beyond my control that made this all come to fruition and put an interesting spin on the whole thing was the fact that way back when I talked about the beginning of 2002 and that assistant manager was setting me up to try to get me fired while he was stealing money. Now, had he succeeded, I would have been out of a job at Wawa, and I would not have become a manager at Wawa, the lowest level, but still a manager. This is important. How? Because I was doing my management training in the beginning of 2003 before I got sick. And for some strange reason, I don't understand how it worked. I know that when I got to the Department of Corrections, this definitely didn't work that way. My benefit package that included my insurance, for some strange reason, didn't actually take place and became effective from January when I was a manager at first of 2003. My insurance didn't actually kick in until the very strangest day. That day that the insurance that I received from being a manager at Wawa officially kicked in, wait for it, April 30th, 2003. Meaning, had I not become a manager and had that interview way back in December of 2002 and became a manager in January 2003, I would not have been covered under insurance when I was in the hospital, meaning they may have not kept me as long as they did, meaning they may not have found that I had sarcoidosis or or pancreatitis, and either one or both in combination probably would have killed me. Let that sink in. Had I not become a manager precisely when I did and had my insurance benefits not kicked in the exact day that I went in the hospital, unbeknownst to me, because I signed all the paperwork and I filled out that I wanted the PPO and all that other stuff, but it took time for all that stuff to process for some real reason. And it wasn't until April 30th of 2003, the day I went in the hospital and stayed for 8 days and had to see an oncologist, a gastro doctor, a pulmonary specialist, and a regular general practitioner doctor, plus going through a lung biopsy, CT scans, plural, lung function tests, plural, um, blood work to the point where I can't believe that there's a single drop in my blood today because of how much they took. All of that would not have been. And I probably would have been in a hospital maybe a day, two tops, and then they would have charged me up like crazy. Because one of my most interesting moments in life was when the bill came from the hospital because they didn't show me the TC scan. I don't know why, but I got a bill in the mail and it had said insurance covered all this stuff, and then it covered the hospital stay. Now we're talking 2003 money, but it was $100,000 that the insurance covered that day that I went in the hospital. From that point, those 8 days were covered, and it was $100,000 for that time period that I otherwise would not have had not the pieces moved in position so that I didn't get fired when that assistant manager, uh, what did we call him? Uh, Mike. And then after surviving that, watching um, Anne move up very quickly in the ranks and becoming a manager, which sort of, I don't know if it was jealousy or just inspiration or the force told me that it was a good idea to move into that position to get the benefits, which essentially saved my life. And really, none of that would have happened without those couple of things. But I couldn't have told the story that I told already without telling you that. And on that note, I'm going to tell you that there's still more things that happened through the month of May and then beyond the summer and the rest of 2003. So I'm going to shut it down for this episode right now with the promise that I'm going to continue this story because there's still more to go in 2003. The bell is rung and the main event is over. Okay, it's time for the spear of the week, which just so happens to be no one in particular. It's more of a type than an actual individual. And this type deserves to be speared on many levels by many different people. What I am speaking of is these people who just feel the need, whenever there's a wide enough shoulder, to create a lane for themselves to turn. Almost always, there are people who are trying to make a right on the line. As long as there's enough shoulder, they choose to use it as a lane. Now, it really happens a lot in front of my house because it goes up to a main road. And of course, there's a wide shoulder. And it's so wide that a lot of people generally tend to park there on the shoulder. And they have a lot of comfort while they park there. There's plenty of space. And sometimes, which makes me laugh, I see cars pulling up to a little past my driveway to the fence, thinking that they're in a turning lane when the only thing that's in front of them is a parked car or two. And they just assume that they're in the lane to turn. And then you recognize that when the light turns green at the top of the block, and they see the cars going past them, but the car that is in front of them is not moving, then they realize, oh, this isn't really a lane. And then what they do is my favorite thing. They zig out of that, get into the real lane, and move forward enough to get back on the shoulder so they can make the right. Seriously, seriously, I don't understand. But that's what they do. And that's why that type of person is the spear of the week. Those who decide to create a lane on the shoulder and make a right. You're the spear of the week. But now, I've got a question from the Magic Book. Let's see what the question is today. I'm excited to see. And what do we got? Well, I was about to read a question that literally is something that doesn't quite um, have a whole lot of bearing on me, but it's about music, and I don't want to answer that question, especially right now, because the question above it is one that makes all the sense in the world, considering that my birthday is tomorrow as I'm recording, not as when you're getting to hear this episode. The question is, what's your favorite topping? Topping of what, you might ask? What's your favorite pizza topping? Now there's a little more clarity, isn't there? What's your favorite pizza topping? Well, I can tell you there is only one topping that I would put on pizza, and I feel that I am a pizza purist to the point where my absolute favorite type of pizza, which of course I was able to indulge myself with on May 3rd, 2025, which would have been yesterday as I record. I went to my favorite and the best pizza place that I've ever experienced in my life, Capone's in South Toms River. It's the very best, especially their brick oven gourmet pizza that has a wood burning stove. Just there's nothing that can compare to it. There isn't. And as a pizza purist, I truly believe that you only need three things: crust, sauce, and cheese. And they've all got to be at the right level, the right quality, and come together. And those three things make the very best pizza. Because I truly believe that if you can't make those three ingredients come out good, when you put that other stuff on top, you're just really eating it for the stuff that you put on top. That's what's you're eating. The other part is no good. You just throw all that other stuff on there just to enhance what's not there from those other three things. So personally, this question I have to answer it in two ways by saying my favorite topping is no topping at all, just plain. But if I must truly answer this question, in the fact that, like I said, you put a topping on an inferior cheese, crust, and sauce because you need something to make it better. The only thing that I would put on it is bacon because bacon makes everything better except for oatmeal. Yeah, I had this really bad bacon oatmeal. But if you put bacon on pretty much everything else, this is literally going to be the only topping that I would put on anything else. Bacon. All right. Now that we've answered the question and given ourselves the spirit of the week, it's time to begin to shut down the show for this week. And like I said, it's appropriate that my birthday, as I'm recording this, is the next day. And I got to talk a little bit about pizza, and I got to, well, record a show because that's one of my favorite things to do. Turns out that the painting that is in front of you as I'm doing this episode is also a very interesting piece that I did not that long ago. I call it the sample pack. Why is it a sample pack? Because if you notice any of the other pieces of art that are one of one that you've seen as I'm doing these episodes, you'll notice that I do different things when I'm painting. I have times where I'll have just unique chunks of color like you see on the right. Then on the very top, that's my favorite. I love doing that, where I just take a toothbrush, not a regular paintbrush, but a toothbrush, and utilize that to create different sort of strokes. Then if you look away from the one that's facing the right that has the pink, the green, yellow, purple, and brown, you look at the one that's to the left of that and down. I like to call that simply um, what do I call that? My drag style, where I just take paint, put it on a line, and I just drag the brush, and then I give it a little bit of metallic finish, so that it sparkles a little bit. To the right of that is a little bit of an over under, as I like to call it, where that pink spot, excuse me, has a blue bar going across, and underneath the blue bar is a green bar and an orange. Now, all the way to the right, next to that, in the little black area, where you have that red and blue square. Now, that, I'm going to admit, didn't quite work the way that I would have done it on the individual paintings, because when I do it on a bigger scale, it has a almost 3D effect. And I've done two like that. In fact, if you look at the archives of the show, I have a show that I use that has one that has a rectangle behind a triangle. And if you look at it in the right way, the triangle looks like it's forward and the rectangle is in the distance, sort of creating an opening. It's just sort of almost a 3D kind of vision that it looks like. Now, that little one there doesn't quite have the same effect as the larger one, but if you look at it right, it does kind of do it. But ultimately, that's what this is. It's a sample pack. A little bit of everything that I do all on one canvas. I thought it was a good idea. Hopefully you do too. Speaking of good ideas, you need to join us on the Lit Facebook group. Join us. There's always room for one more. I'm on Instagram at Philip Henderson 5102. I'm out there somewhere on X. Check me out on all these different things. And of course, if you're watching this show now, I definitely ask you to subscribe to at Phil the Lit, my YouTube channel, so that you'll get all the good stuff that's going on. You'll get to see all the shows as they're in the progress. And like I said, right now, I'm going to have my 110th show, and I believe that's going to be the first one in June. And that's going to continue 2003, and it's going to be the rest of May outside of the hospital, and we'll start from there and see where we go. Because at this point in time, I have some other stuff that I want to do, other shows, but like I said, this is a story that I want to tell, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tell it. I'm going to tell it. And for the words of wisdom, until I finish this, I'm going to keep using the same words of wisdom. So by the end, you're going to definitely remember these words. Everyone has a story. Tell it. You never know who needs to hear it. I don't know, because the stuff that I already told, it's pretty telling stuff. And the stuff that's coming up after this, there's definitely some meat on the bone. My recommendation is you should try gnawing on it. On that note, my name is Phil, and you just listened to The Lift.